Hey, y'all. So we are on our third and final loom for the Enlightened despotism. So we're looking at this, the impact of the Enlightenment on Russia here. We've talked already about Prussia and Austria. We identified Frederick the Great probably was the most successful enlightened despot, where Joseph II was the most ambitious. Now we're going to look at someone kind of in the middle of the realm here. We're going to eventually get to Catherine the Great. Now, Russia, after Peter the Great, remember Peter the Great was the westernizer, dies in 1725, and really left Russia wanting a return to the traditions. And his six successors failed to regain the power and prestige of Peter the Great. So Russia was not quite in a time of troubles like they were after Ivan the Dread or the Terrible, but they're more in a position where there's a sense of weakness. It's not totally terrible for Russia, but still not a great position. Peter III was a weak czar, and we're going to see him more about the war, the 7 Years' War, a little bit later. But Peter III was a weak czar who married a German princess named Catherine, and because of several blunders, the palace guard will assassinate Peter III, making Catherine the czarina. I want to point out that probably Catherine had something to do with this assassination, but again, that will be more. We may delve into that a little bit more a little bit later, uh, next chapter. But with that said, let's look at Catherine II as an enlightened despot. Being educated in Germany, she was very familiar and well versed in the enlightened ideals. And with this, she and Voltaire had a very tight friendship, where Voltaire sent her literally hundreds of letters that she ultimately bound into books and put in a library. So she has this vast wealth of intimate letters of Voltaire. When I say intimate, more about the details and how that enlightened ideals can be applied to Russia. She was keen. She was a keen politician who weighted reforms with a need not to alienate the nobility. I think Spivogel does a good job with that discussion, because again, the old boyars who, with the table of ranks, they've kind of their power had been impeded upon. But during the time since Peter, they've kind of restored some of those in the aristocratic resurgence. So she realizes she had to kind of toe that line, if you will, not do too many changes. Some of the reforms she applied enlightened ideals. She reorganized the Russian civil service and provinces. In doing so, it became more rational organization and more efficient. She embraced limited religious reform. She even led, maybe on a test, you might see a document about her embracing even toleration of the Muslims in the western part of her empire. But even that would be limited. So she's not the religious reformer of, let's say, Frederick the Great. Her most profound change in Enlightened Reform was her instructions. Her instructions was a document or a series of letters to the nobility that called for them to help her with reforms such as abolition of serfdom. She wanted to make equality of law. She wanted to do these, but she really pondered what a Russia would look like without serfdom. So that's one of the things I do want to point out. She's asking the nobility to help her with that. Um, Nobles' power comes from serfdom. So I think you can see kind of how this is going to go. The nobles are going to resist. I am going to reorganize your notes here because I don't know why Spivoglu kind of banters back and forth. But with those instructions, she's attempting to get the result of that is going to be the Pugachev rebellion. And I know Spivoglu has the chart of nobility before them, but if you look at the years, clearly there's causation here. The rumors of abolition of serfdom had disseminated throughout Russia. Pugachev was a Russian peasant who organized the largest revolt in Russian history. He convinced a large group of peasants that he actually was Peter III, and used revolutionary rhetoric that said that he had been disposed of by Catherine to maintain serfdom. So he rallies this large group of peasants, and this is the largest peasant revolt in Russian history, and maybe in fact European history. The Tsar, the Russian nobility refused to act, They're like, hey, you want to help this? If you want to abolish serfdom, this is what you get. You create this chaos, Catherine. You kind of deal with it yourself. And in the end, the Pugachev rebellion will end any real hope of reform. And you see my little detail here. As Catherine's army quashes the rebellion, she completely turns her back on reform and she burned her entire library of letters of Voltaire. This indicates that Catherine's desire for enlightened reform was limited to the concept of her stability. And with the end of enlightened reform, Catherine turned away from reform. She feared the chaos of the peasantry. She issues the Charter of Nobility of 1785. And I want to point out, I know it's just somewhere different in your notes, but the Pugachev Rebellion is really what inspired the Charter of Nobility. It is a part of that aristocratic resurgence that we've been talking about. The aristocratic resurgence where the Russian nobles are demanding lost liberties, and it altered the table of ranks. It's going to empower the nobility. It takes away the 25-year mandatory military service. The nobles are going to retain some of the freedom, and the openness to peasantry to allow is going to be restricted. So this chart of nobility helps the nobility regain some of their lost liberties, and in some ways, this is the apex. In the end, Catherine II was more concerned about her stability than enlightened reform. So as we're kind of finishing, we're looking at that idea. So the enlightened ideals are limited. Now, with that said, I do want to point out Catherine is Catherine the Great. She is Catherine the Great because of her great expansion of Russian territory. She's able to do what Peter the Great wasn't able to do. She defeats the Turks, and as a result of the Treaty of Kuchak-Katanari, they're going to be able to gain all this land on the Black Sea. They extend it. This is called the Crimea. And she's going to oversee the three partitions of Russia. So, Poland, excuse me, the three partitions of Poland. So now all of a sudden, Russia gains land to its south. Russia gains land to the west. And now Russia is really a significant Western European power. So we see Catherine the Great. We see that in some ways she's like Frederick the Great. She expands territory. She expands the military. She's significant. But her enlightened reform is limited to the extent of her stability. So now, as we're going to conclude here, enlightened despotism, as we reevaluate it, in the 18th century, enlightened absolutism did see some key reforms, such as reducing crimes and punishments, as well as religious toleration. Joseph II proved to be the only enlightened despot who fully embraced the enlightened ideals, but we know it was a miserable failure. And Frederick the Great and Catherine embraced enlightened despotism only to the extent of bringing stability to the reigns. In the end, the Enlightenment only had limited impact on the immediacy of absolutism. There is no revolutionary reform, and as we're looking into Unit 5, this is going to be one of the elements of the revolutions, the creation of the revolutions that really start in the 1780s and will reverberate all the way through to the late 19th century. And it's because enlightened despotism never truly evolved into what Voltaire had dreamed of. And with that in, we are done with the lecture. I hope you guys are able to ponder and gather all this information.